channel. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel, like our videos, ring the notification bell, and comment down below. I'm here to introduce the daughter of a former captain of the Ohio State Reformatory.
Episode 3 of the Ohio State Reformatory, located at Mansfield, Ohio. Captain Osborne, my dad, took charge of what they called the Mean Machine, which was a organized football flag program that they would play their games out in their yard, and they would practice just like a regular team, but they'd use flags. The team grew, and Dad was in charge of making sure that he had a team that could, do well. So they would challenge different other teams, and then they kept building their skills and stuff with that. This occurred in 1982, where Dad took over a team called the Mean Machine. The Mean Machine basically was involved with a lot of different inmates. Some of those inmates included Bates, who played center, Green, who played wide receiver, Ranshaw, who happened to be playing tackle, and he was called Big 50 because he was one of the biggest guys on the team, Chrissy, which was tackle, and White, which was guard. Now, the middle section, which is located right here, included Kalinsky, tight end, Wilson, right linebacker, Shannon, wide receiver, Bennett, guard, Jones, wide receiver, and then, of course, this was my dad, Captain Osborne, who was considered the supervisor or the owner of the team. Kneeling in front included Leonard, another coach that would help with coaching the team, Houston, the fullback, Laird, who happened to be the quarterback of the team, Riddle, which happened to be the linebacker, and also captain of the team, Haas, who happened to be tailback, Perez Cha, which was fullback, and Lilly, which they gave as what they called the name giver. He would be the one that actually assigned them different names. There was one more player who happened to be called Zeta, and Zeta was basically sitting, and he would help with organization of the team. Now, the inmates actually got their picture taken. When they did, one of the inmates over in the wood shop built a frame and stained it and placed it in this picture frame, and this hung in Dad's office for quite a few years. The inmates' handmade frame, if you look in the back, they wrote all the names of the players down so Dad would know, and then they hooked it, and this hung directly in front of Dad's office desk. So he was pretty proud of his Mean Machine. They practiced their games in the yard. Like I said, Dad had tryouts for the positions on the team. Sports was very important to Dad because throughout his youth and working over at OSR, he was involved in many different sports. My dad played basketball. He played football back in those days. And he also played some other sports like softball or baseball. And for a long time, he enjoyed playing it with his brothers. So on Dad's sporting events and sports, Dad in school played basketball, football, and he was involved with actually a traveling softball or baseball team with all his brothers, and they were known as the Merchants, and they were really good, and a lot of people didn't even want to play the baseball with them because they were so good. Dad had lost his leg over in World War II, and he tried to play baseball when he came back, and he noticed every time he hit the ball and was running to first, any base that he slid or had to go past and had to slide into, the wooden leg wouldn't allow him to slide, and he'd actually run past it. So instead of always doing that, he decided he'd become a coaching staff to help the team because he loved baseball that much. He was committed to baseball, but due to his injuries from World War II, it caused him not to be able to. So he worked with his brothers. His one brother was a pitcher, and he actually traveled to Cleveland and tried out for the Indians. That's how good he was. He was able to go through the whole thing and ended up finding out that he was actually called up and he actually was trying out and actually made the team, but wasn't able to play because he had to come back with the rest of the guys. Like I said, he dedicated his time to that baseball team. And Dad went to Michigan State right before he was called over to World War II in Germany, and he was actually playing sports before he went, and he was drafted, and the war called him in, and he went over there. By coming over to the OSR, he began to get involved in the different sports that were being offered for the inmates. Some of the sports he tried to look for participation so that the inmates could get involved with. Some of the participation sports clubs that were there, Ohio State Reformatory offered a softball team, a traveling softball team. And now this team is kind of unique because the players got to go to various locations, and they actually played different teams softball. I remember in particular, the catcher of that team was called McAlpine. He's one of the best catchers that I had ever seen, and I had played softball for 8 years, so I know this guy was good at what he was doing. So he made sure that field was run pretty good. Coaches and instructors would volunteer their time, or they would come over to take charge of some of the teams that were busy over there. Like I said, the softball teams had their playing fields, and all equipment that they used in any sport was placed in a special location, and they would lock it down because they didn't want the inmates taking advantage of the equipment, so they put it there so they'd have it. Some of the donations were given to the inmates by various people, and they'd use it for their sports. The inmates that played on the softball team always got transported into like a school bus, but school buses were actually, there were guards that were on the school bus, and they were armed with guns just in case they tried to escape when they were at the games. They'd ride the bus to the game, and the guards basically watched them play the full game, and then they'd get back on the bus and they'd head back to the reformatory. My dad, mom, and I had an opportunity to watch one of their games at Shreve, Ohio. They played a doubleheader, and then they would come back to the prison, unload, and the inmates, and they would collect all their equipment, and they'd get ready for the next game. They continued with this program until they were unfortunately forced to stop due to specific circumstances, which they ended up having to quit the team, forced them to stop the traveling program. My dad was involved in another sport. Another sport was the boxing program club. This, he joined, inmates would join that had common knowledge of boxing and an interest in being a part of the boxing program. They'd create a boxing ring in the workout area for this sport, and they would challenge people that come in. And Dad had several very good boxers that would box, and they held records because they were so good at what they did. They had to buy the boxing gloves unless someone donated them, and the machines to work out with for the inmates. They looked for a coach that could instruct them, the inmates, the art of boxing. They challenged other inmates that boxed at the OSR. This went on for quite a few years. They came up with boxing ring names that they called themselves. Several outside sources donated the equipment, or they would come into the prison and they would actually box the prisoners that were on the team. The goal of the OSR, Ohio State Reformatory, was to reform the individuals so that when they got released from OSR, that they would be able to cope outside the prison. It was a way of getting them used to life outside the prison. Life in the prison wasn't always good. So by adding these extra programs, it provided them the chance to try different things. Now, in addition to that, Dad was into the sporting goods and stuff like that and the vocational programs. This one, Dad actually was given the job of teaching a class of remedial readers that struggled with reading. These inmates actually came to his class. A lot of them had no idea how to read. It turned out to be a stepping stone to other vocational programs offered to the inmates at OSR. These vocational programs allowed the inmates to earn certification in a field, in various fields, and then those certifications, once they were given a chance to leave the prison, they'd take that with them, and that gave them jobs outside the prison if someone hired them. When they would leave OSR, they'd accomplished a feat that a lot of people didn't think they would, and they actually went out into society very successful. Some of these inmates changed their lives forever. We were building a new house. We hired ex-inmates from Mansfield to put up the drywall. They did a great job with their work. Dad was pleased with their efforts. This was one example of how they became a part of society outside the prison. They learned this skill and was able to actually perform this skill with a group of people. And this company gave the inmates a chance to work. And a lot of times people are always afraid of letting a prisoner get a job outside the prison because they are afraid that they're going to do bad things and cause them to cause trouble. Well, this group really worked well together. Dad had several projects which he paid some of the vocational programs to make for him. He wanted the inmates to complete these projects. The inmates could not be expected to get paid for these projects. Dad provided creative and innovative ideas for these inmates to do work on. Dad supported various programs by purchasing their work or skills that went into the program to continue training the individuals. Some of these programs basically started by people bringing things into the prison and these inmates would work on it. Dad had the wood shop create a cherry corner cupboard which hung in our kitchen. Dad brought the wood in for them and the supplies for it, and they built it right there, and Dad brought it home to hang up into our kitchen. Beautiful, beautiful work. Dad had several inmates create an artistic work. They framed pictures which they made out of frames. Two of the pictures, one in particular, was of an old farmhouse with all the outside buildings. He placed animals found on the farm. There was a horse-drawn wagon. The farm was framed in a light golden wooden frame, and it hangs in our living room today. Another picture, which was a large red roof barn beside a creek. The water was used to help grain corn for feed on the farm. The barn is surrounded by a forest of pine trees. Huge stones are placed near the edge of the creek. The red barn has a tall tower with windows. Dad had several wooden plaques made to place on the desk. They said Captain G.T. Osborne and they were long framed plaques that he had made. The Winnie the Pooh plaque was actually elongated name for my desk, and what was kind of neat, it was made out of real hard wood, and it lasted me for many years at my work. I enjoyed having those things when Dad got them made for me, because it's something that the inmates put a lot of effort to put into it. Dad actually had a great idea for the warden, W.G. Copley. He wanted one inmate to create a buffalo statue made out of one piece of wood, and they carved this buffalo. And this guy took hours and hours of carving to do it, and he actually stained the wood. The buffalo took a long time to complete, but once it was completed, it actually remained in Warden W.G. Copley's office, right behind his desk, and people could admire that inmate's work. Those were just some of the projects that Dad had inmates work on. He had another inmate create 2 long pixie dolls, and they were girls that were real tall and long with beautiful dresses on. The inmates drew them on 2 separate cardboards, and then what they did was they took a lamination and placed on the outer side so that it wouldn't smear the paint. One thing I thought was kind of neat was the barber program over there was actually supported by my dad, and I kind of laugh about it because he took his grandsons over to the prison to get their haircuts. The inmates were trained by an instructor, and they allowed them to practice on outside customers. His grandsons went over several times with Dad to get their haircuts over there. It didn't cost much to get the haircut, but it was good practice, and the inmates were being graded on how well they were able to cut the hair. Dad encouraged inmates to be rehabilitated while in OSR by taking on jobs in the prison. Dad hired inmates to work with him in the deputy's office. They'd become clerks, filers. They would clean for him in the DO. They would do anything like that, especially when they wanted to get involved in outside activities. He encouraged prisoners to be creative with their artistic ability in various programs. Dad brought over his entire family, to the culinary department one time, and what they did there, they prepared a complete meal for all the families. We had to enter the prison in order to get to the cafeteria. Dad escorted us to the cafeteria. The inmates were being graded on quality of food, preparation of the food, servicing the food, table preparation, and an overall performance of the meal. They wanted to know if the food was served cold, warm, or hot, or too hot. They would receive certification to work anywhere outside the prison in any restaurant or food service business. And this took a while for the inmates to learn these special skills. Dad supported the auto mechanic and auto body classes. They were working on a racing car of a guy that owned this car, and they got it prepared. The inmates were trained in these areas to work on the car. The instructors came in to teach their students the art of these 2 programs. The car was completed and raced in several racing events and performed well in each exhibition. The students were graded on the completion of this car. When they left the prison, they would have the ability to work in any car dealership, auto body shop, or mechanic shop. And it was because of these rehabilitation vocational programs that were being offered. The equipment was always stored in a locked area so the inmates wouldn't have access unless the instructor was on duty. OSR, for a reason in the attention, was to reform all inmates. However, not all inmates wanted to be reformed, so they refused to learn the vocational training. Dad's remedial reading opened many doors for his students. They were able to read instructional guides for each vocational training program. Some of his students wanted to pursue higher education benefits and enrolled in college classes or programs offered by Ashland University. Instructors would come into the prison and they would teach specific classes for these students who wanted to pursue a higher education. Came to teach a course of study to the men. Some inmates use computer-enhanced programs to continue with their degrees. Once the students completed the required classes, they had a chance to graduate from Ashland University. When they were out on their own, they would be able to pursue these degrees. They became very successful and satisfied with their choice or their life choices. Many of the students are the first to graduate from college from some of these inmates. Some of them had never even saw a college, didn't think they would get a chance to, but they actually walked away with a diploma from Ashland University. So it's very important. Dad pondered at one time they were going to offer Dad a chance to bring his whole family over and live in one of the apartments in the front by W.G. Copley's office. And Dad questioned it and thought, oh, it'd be a good idea, but it'd be too close to work. Had a lot of questions. He liked the idea of the fact that we would all be there, but the only problem is he kept pondering, it'd be awful close to inmates. And, a lot of the inmates were able to go free. They cut grass outside the facility and stuff like that. And Dad was kind of questioning, since he had a daughter and a wife that would be coming over to live with him. So at one point he said he thought that would be one thing that he would actually pass on. And that is all of episode 3. Look forward to episode 4 coming up soon. Subscribe to our program if you want to learn more about OSR and some of the things my dad was involved with. The next episode will give you a different viewpoint because there's going to be things that you're probably not sure and didn't know that happened over the reformatory. So it's going to be something a little different. I told you episode 3 was vocational and college classes and sports, where episode 4 is going to give you another viewpoint, the darker viewpoint of Mansfield Reformatory. And I thank you for your time. See ya!